What is going on, everyone? Christopher Journalist Comics and Pop Culture. A fun video here today. I'm going to be looking at really asking the question, are we debunking this myth that newsstands are this ultimate, rare, valuable comic next to their direct market counterparts? Well, there's not really a black and white answer to that, but we are going to break this down today. Of course, if you all aren't subscribed to the channel, please take some time to do so and check out all the links in the description below as well, where you can find different ways to support the channel, including links to A1 Comics, because it is, folks, A1 Wednesday. So I got to take a few seconds just to give a big shout out to A1 Comics. If you're in the Northern California area, they got locations in Sacramento, Roseville, and Folsom. But more importantly, they are nationwide. They are on Instagram with live sales every Wednesday and Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. They are, of course, on Whatnot. They are on Twitch as well, folks. Their information is below. Check them out. Give them some love. And I promise you, you will not be disappointed. But we got a video to talk about. I heard he sells comics, and they're all newsstands. All right. Now, of course, this history is going to provide the context for everything that I'm going to talk about today. Now, a lot of us have seen something like this before, especially the image on the left, where we look at the newsstand percentage versus direct on the market. Now, when the direct market first came about, there were a very small percentage of the market. And I mean, remember that comic books started as a newsstand market. The direct market came along and essentially changed the game as we know it. It took a long time, though, for direct to even catch up to newsstand. As you see that it wasn't until about 1986 that there was a 50-50 split between newsstand and direct. And then after that, going into the late 80s, newsstand started to dwindle off. And of course, you get into the 90s, and there is a very small percentage that is newsstand. And if you look at the chart on the right, it gives you more of that visual of how much more the direct market took over once the 90s hit. So this is very important always, but I often see folks out there, whether it's in IG live sales or Whatnot live sales or just whatever the case may be, and talking up, oh, it's a newsstand. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, I mean, are we understanding the context? Now, even the context of, well, if you're calling out the fact that a comic book in the late 1970s is a newsstand as a way to hype it up to, sell it for a higher value, is that invalid? I'm not going to completely say that it's invalid, but I will say this. And this is what I say in my Whatnot live sales, because I want to be completely honest and transparent. If you look specifically at the amount of newsstands versus direct, there's two things that you need to understand. The amount, the percentage, and how many were actually produced. But secondly, how many were either returned, because the newsstand markets, the LCSs, the newsstands themselves, anybody that was purchasing their comic books from the newsstand market had the ability to return the comics to the publishers to get a refund back or to get money back. So even though, let's take for example, in 1982, 80% were newsstand, but how many of those 80% had half of the cover ripped off, because that's what they would do before they sent them back? How many were sent back? So that eliminates something off top, a certain amount of those comics off top of that percentage, right? And then how many were, damaged sitting on the newsstand? So the thing that you got to take into consideration is grade. Personally, I don't hype up newsstands at all until a certain point in time around the mid 80s, just because of how prevalent they were. But if it's a high grade, that's where, as a collector or as a buyer, you might be willing to say, okay, this is a very fine near mint or a near mint higher, and it's a newsstand. It came out in 1980. Now, there were a ton of newsstands, but because it's in such high grade, maybe there's fewer high grade copies out there on the market, and that may be a reason to look at the fact that it's a newsstand as a reason to pay a premium even for the early newsstands. What I often say, at least up until the late 80s, is buy the grade. If, of course, you want to balance out the value that it's going for, but if you have, for example, a book from 1985 or 86, and you have an option of buying a newsstand versus a direct, and they're in the same ballpark of price range, I always go with the higher grade. Keep that in mind, folks. But let's look at what indicators I use for when I'm looking at books, so to where if I should really be concerned with it being a newsstand. Now, the way we're going to break this down, we're going to look at Marvel Comics and Marvel Comics' indicators, and then DC Comics' indicators, because they're going to be different. So, what is it with Marvel Comics that indicates to me if I should care that it's a newsstand? You know what it is, folks? It's the cover corner boxes in the Marvel trademark. The Marvel trademark was a Marvel Comics Group banner for many, many years, from the early 70s up until September 1983. Now, I'm just using these Spider Man books as an example. Every Marvel book published up until September of 1983 had that Marvel Comics Group banner across the top there. So, if you look at the chart, what were newsstands doing in 1983? Well, you can see what happened in 82 next to 86. So, roughly, they're probably anywhere from 60 to 70% of the market. So that's still a ton. Now, in October of 1983, they finally, Marvel that is, took the Marvel Comics Group banner off, stuck with the corner logo box, and kept just the Marvel trademark. This is an indicator for me to say that personally, anything before October of 1983, I'm not going to be too concerned with it being a newsstand whatsoever. So if a Marvel comic has that Marvel Comics Group banner at the top, I don't care if it's a newsstand or direct. I'm going to go for whatever is the best buy depending on grade and price. Make sense? Now, once we get outside of the banner into late 83 and 84, again, if you look at what happened in 86. Now, of course, 84, 85, this corner box with the standard Marvel right at the top of it, that ran for those couple of years. And although newsstands still were a larger percentage of directs on the market, it was very, very much closer, almost to that 50% mark. Now, you go into 1986, and something else changed with the corner box, and it was the Marvel trademark again. All year long, as you can see right here in Amazing Spider-Man 275, all year long on all of Marvel's books, they ran the Marvel 25th anniversary. So again, what happened in 1986? 50-50. There were a 50-50 split. But again, you got to take into consideration there's almost undoubtedly less newsstands out there in general, because a lot of them were ripped and returned for that refund, for that credit. And there's definitely going to be not as many high grades at this point as well. So that ran all year of 1986. And then in 1987, they changed the box back to a Marvel font that was italicized. Now, this is where I start really getting into saying, okay, I know that italicized Marvel trademark logo. This ran from April of 87 to February of 1990. So if you look at from where it says 86 to 1990 on the chart, that's when you know that those newsstands every year after year started shrinking more and more. So this is where I really start taking into huge consideration, okay, the italicized Marvel in the corner box, is it a newsstand, or if or is it direct? Because I most likely want to take newsstand over direct every time. Of course, again, grade still matters, folks. I'm not going to take a beat up reader copy of a Marvel book or any book that came out in 1988 just because it's a newsstand. If there's a high grade direct, it's going to still give you more value. But if the grades are comparable, so maybe say there's a 9.2 direct graded CGC and a 9.0 newsstand, depending on what they're selling for, I may be privy to that newsstand, even though it's one grade point lower. Maybe. All right. Following along yet, folks? All right, but this isn't where it stops. This is where it really matters. The 1990s logo. So, Marvel Comics changed their logo to have the Marvel with the trademark with that big block M behind it and kind of the graffiti font Comics. March 1990 was the first time that their titles had this logo. Now, look at the chart on the left. What happened in 1990? Look at that percentage. 15% roughly of the market was newsstands. So that's why you know right now those newsstands were extremely rare comparative to their direct market counterparts. All right, and then of course you see what kept happening. 1995 under 10%, 2000 about 5%, and so forth until 2013, roughly just about 1%. So I hope that brings some light into context. We are going to go over to the DC books now because you can't really look at DC books as their logos stand on the comic books. That's what makes understanding the Marvel books and being able to look at newsstand versus direct with Marvel comics very easy because it's right there in their logos, right? Well, DC, a little bit different. DC had the round star spangled DC logo in the top left corner for many, many, many years, starting in the early 70s, early to mid 70s, up until the later 80s. So the one thing that you can use to take, well, does direct or newsstand matter? For DC books is price point, it's cover price. So this Batman book right here is a 50 cent cover price. It's a Bronze Age book, and if you look at the chart on the left, you can see that up until 1983, the cover prices ran up to 60 cents. So whereas Marvel, we were looking at that Marvel Comics Group banner, with DC, it's anything 60 cents and below. That where for me, I would be like, if it's newsstand or direct, it doesn't really matter. Now, a really cool thing is at the end of 1983, DC actually helps us out because they started adding the month and year on the cover. If you see the Batman 366, it says 75 cents, top right corner, issue 366, and it says December of 83. This lasted up until February of 1989, where after that, they started taking the price point off again. So you had to look, okay, this is Batman 483. Well, it's $1 cover price. So you go to the cover price chart. When were books selling for $1? Okay, so roughly, around end of 89 to 1990. So that's why you can know that, okay, direct versus newsstand matters. These newsstands are pretty rare on the market at this point in time. But looking at what they did with the books, having the actual year on the cover from 83 to 89, again, you could just use that year, look back to the chart. If it's 84 to 85, you might want to take it into consideration if it's a higher grade. But once you get into 86 up to 89, it starts dwindling a little more in terms of the newsstand percentage. Now, what matters with DC is again that 90s logo, and they actually did change it to make it different to where we can use it as an indicator. And this happened in January of 1990. Now you can see that they still have the same Star Spangled DC logo, but what happened under that logo? Well, they have a corner box now. It was always a thinner corner box. It was thinner than the logo, and you have the characters popping out of the logo. I really like this, and this was a huge era where I was collecting. And they actually went back to putting the year on the cover as well. But again, what happened in 1990? Look at the chart. 15% of the market was newsstand. So I hope this really helps you all educate yourself to, the certain indicators that you can see just from looking at a book, looking at the cover of a book and say, should I really be consuming with newsstand or not? And again, I'm going to stress this so much, folks. Just don't get caught up on the newsstand hype. Don't think that just because a comic book is a newsstand that you have to, catch the FOMO and pay, 2 to 3 times what you could pay if you weren't thinking that, you have it in your head that, oh, it's newsstand, it must be rare. That's not the case, folks. So be very, very careful when you are in the market, especially when you're in a live sale and you're right there and you're bidding books up. And we know how it could get. Emotions, are running, and it's just, it could be very intense at times. Be smart buyers, folks. Again, if it's, for me, pre 1983 or 1983 and earlier, if it's not a super, super near mint copy, I don't care about it being newsstand or direct whatsoever. We get into the mid 80s, then start taking it into a bit of consideration. We get into the late 80s, that's when for me it really starts mattering. And then of course, folks, anything after that, I mean, if you get newsstands from the mid 90s up to like the 2000s, wow, wow. Now that's when you can really, really take that into consideration is a valuable book, especially for those keys. But that's the video for today, folks. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But before we go, of course, I got to give a huge shout out to all of my channel members, starting off with my Patreon members. Thank you all so much for your continued support. Anybody that is interested in becoming a Patreon member, you do get special monthly perks, and it's only $3.99 a month, the price of one new comic book. And of course, a big shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me every single month. Again, if you guys are interested, that's only $1.99 a month. You can click that join button below to help support the channel. But you all support me by just being here, watching, and commenting every single day. Thank you guys so much. Be well, and until next time.